In the autumn of 1902, the disappearance of 13-year-old Orla Byrne shook up the small Irish town of Queenstown, now known as Cobh. After a 3-day search, Orla's body was found in a field on the outskirts of town. Every bone in her body was shattered, injuries attributed to someone who had fallen from a great height. Nora Walsh, who had been with Orla on the day she vanished, claimed to have seen a large flock of birds in the sky, a dark omen. Following this, events transpired in which her friend was taken by a mysterious shadow man. This is her documented account of what the 3 girls witnessed that night and how it forever darkened this small, sleepy town. The place I grew up in was known for its row of colorful houses, thriving harbor, and idyllic countryside. In summer, this was enough to lure a flock of tourists in, but in winter months, it could feel spitefully cold and suffocating. During the cold season, the locals would pass time with whispers of missing sailors and tales of unknown beings lurking close by. My best friend, Orla, and I believed stories like this were made up to scare us into behaving, and as such, we took very little notice of them. On the day that it happened, a few days after Samhain, the remains of this fall festival filled the town. Wind-battered decorations of witches and monsters hung from the door arches, and molding black-spotted turnips rotted on doorsteps. See, Orla and we came up with a way to amuse ourselves by tricking other people. I mean, anything was better than being at home where Dad would be deep in his bottles by now. Orla just wanted us to have some fun, and God, I did too. I sneaked some white bed sheets out of the house when Ma wasn't looking, and Orla crept onto doorsteps and grabbed leftover turnips. As I waited at our meeting point, the iron fence on the edge of town, my arms full of bed sheets, I saw these 2 figures emerge from the town path. Orla and a girl a couple inches shorter than her younger sister, Molly. Each of them held a turnip by its string handle in each hand, the lit candles inside illuminating the warped faces carved into the white flesh. On seeing Molly, I rolled my eyes. Unimpressed, Orla's little sister had come along. Orla just sighed and whispered, "She followed me. If I hadn't let her come, she would have tattled on me to Ma." We walked just beyond the town boundaries on the cobbled path that led to Cork City, a half-day trek away. It was a key route for boat builders and sailors. It was busy every day. In our eyes, it was the perfect place to carry out our trick. We were in good spirits, but the further we walked, the more the nerves clawed away at me. I didn't want to get into trouble, but I also didn't want to be seen as boring in Orla's eyes. I mean, not after the last time. On the way, Molly, who had skipped ahead, stopped and pointed down at something on the path, and we all huddled around the source of her attention. A dead crow, its black feathers shimmering with fresh blood. I should have known then that this was a bad omen and told us to go home and to forget this plan. But instead, as Orla stepped over the dead bird, I stepped over it too, and I didn't dare peer back at it. When we reached our intended location, the dry stone wall into Mr. Fenton's field, we giggled in nervous excitement as we placed the turnips in a row by the path, and then we watched as those flames flickered in the dwindling late afternoon light. And then we climbed over the wall and we hid next to the overgrowth of weeds that curled to the stone edges. Orla flung a bedsheet over Molly's head, pulled a pair of scissors out of her cardigan pocket, and pinched that fabric above where she guessed Molly's eyes could be. Molly flinched in alarm, and I murmured and noted under my breath how my ma was going to kill me. Orla's smile increased as she giggled, "Come on, stay still so I don't poke your eyes out." Molly instantly became as still as the dead crow we had just passed and let Orla cut the holes. I chewed on my lip. I didn't say one word, knowing better than to argue with Orla when she was holding something sharp. She told me to relax and that we would think up a cover story to tell my ma. She flung the sheet over my head and I inhaled as she pinched the fabric above my eyes and cut in eye holes. Wonkily cut, so I found my view obscured. I was convinced she did that on purpose. When it came to her own sheet, I maintained my held breath. I was worried that she would ask me to cut in the holes with my obscured view. She didn't. She threw the sheet over her head, swishing her arms beneath it, and then piercing the end of her scissors through it to make one hole, and then another. 2 pinpricks, and then she sawed with the scissor edge to make it bigger. I decided that it was best not to think about the damaged bedsheets or my ma's fury. Orla said she would think up an excuse to appease my ma, and I knew that despite her many flaws, Orla was true to her word. I silently told myself to relax and just enjoy this moment. So the 3 of us made ghost sounds, we jabbed each other in the arms and bellies and threw weeds out as we giggled beneath the wall. I'm not sure how long we waited before someone came along. The sky was the last shade of gray before darkness took over. We heard these nearing footsteps, and then Orla pulled a hand free from beneath her sheet and signaled for us to stay still. I stared through the gaps and I saw a man in a brown jacket and leather boots. He had a worn sailor bag slung over his shoulder and was humming to himself as he walked. But on seeing the lit turnips, he stopped walking, and he did a double take. Orla poked us both, the signal to move. She went first, leaping over the wall and screeching, "Boo." Molly was next. She jumped up, trying her best to suppress a giggle as she wailed and flung her arms wildly beneath the sheet, and then I climbed on top of the wall, swinging my arms about and emitting a mixture of wails and screams. My obscured vision made me misjudge my movement, and I felt my knees graze against the stones as I tumbled forward, outstretching my hands to lessen my fall, and in doing so, knocking a turnip over. Even with how wet the season was, I watched in alarm as the patch of grass began to sizzle beneath the ember. The man's face turned from surprise to annoyance. He stamped the flames with his heavy-booted foot and muttered, "Damn, kids, you could have set the whole place alight." Orla and Molly revealed their faces and apologized through red-faced laughter, but I remained under the sheet, and I stared at my knees, unable to see the true extent of the damage that I'd just done to them. The man told us that we should stop this foolishness and go home. Without removing the sheet from my head, I muttered, "Sorry, sir, we will." He blew the flames out on the rest of our turnips, knowing that we didn't have the embers to relight them, and then he clutched a turnip under his arm and kicked the rest into the long grass. He walked ahead, but then he stopped, and he turned and he looked back at us, and scowling, he said, "The air has turned. You should make haste while you still can." He walked off, humming that same tune to himself, a tune to this day I know but cannot place. I sniffed at the air, smelling only sea salt and this faint linger of rust. I pulled the sheet off myself and I folded it up, glimpsing quickly at my ripped stockings and my swollen, bloodied knees as I scrunched the sheet into a ball. Orla poked me in the arm and said, "Hey, don't be boring as well as clumsy. We're not done spooking people yet." She grabbed Molly and gave her a leg up over the wall, and then she jumped over it with ease and looked at me, a hand on her waist as she gave me a hard blue-eyed stare through the jagged eye holes and said, "Come on, Nora, one more scare, then we'll go home." I could feel her smirking beneath that sheet, and I found myself smiling too, despite my throbbing knees and hesitant heart. Despite my hesitation, I gave a slight nod of my head in agreement. I struggled over the fence, and Orla helped me replace the sheet over myself. As she did this, I heard Molly gasp. Suddenly, Orla stopped helping me, and above me, I heard the flapping of wings and rattling chirps, rasping sounds that seemed almost deafening. I wrestled with my sheet to find my eye holes so I could look up and see the blurred display unfolding above me. Birds. Ravens, I think. Hundreds of them swarming above us, this black shadow in the dark gray sky. The birds circled above us and I smelt it. This stench of putrid rotting meat. From the sunken faces that Molly and Orla pulled, they must have smelt it too. I coughed and I spluttered, covering my mouth with my sheet. And then the birds began to filter off and that rancid smell dispelling as they did too. Before I had time to mention it, I felt Orla grab my arm and pull me downward behind the wall. Molly was down there already, perching there amid the weeds, her arms cuddled around her sheeted legs. "Someone's coming," she hissed at me. I peeked through the small gaps in the wall, but all I saw was a shadowy figure on the path, a man, his caped silhouette flapping beyond the wall. I heard Orla rustling next to me as realization hit me too late. The other passerby had ruined our turnip display, so there was no reason for this man to have stopped here unless he heard us. Unless he already knew that we were there. I reached out to pull Orla's arm, but she moved free of me. I heard her giggle as she pounced forward, leaping over the wall with ease as she wailed and flourished her arms. Molly and I exchanged knowing looks, and then as we were about to emerge over the wall, we heard it. That scream. Not a put-on ghostly wail, an agonized scream. One that would only come from the darkest depths of a person in peril. I scrambled above that wall, battling with the stones and the sheet, and my heart was thudding and my mind was racing. I couldn't see that shadowy man or Orla. Molly was the first to clear that wall and rush over to the path. She shrieked first, a sound almost as deafening as the birds had been, and then she crouched down and pointed at what remained on that path, a single black feather. I flung that sheet off me and I ran up that path shouting Orla's name, but there was no sign of her. Molly remained by the feather, and as I walked back toward her, defeated and confused, I noticed that her small body was trembling in fear as she pointed up at the sky. I followed her gaze and I saw the flock of birds. And this time they were soundless as they plagued the entire sky. I sensed the wrongness. And so I fumbled to grab Molly's arm beneath the sheet that still covered her, and I pulled her forward. We ran as the shadow of birds silently flew toward us. I felt them pecking at my arms, their leathery feathers and their razor-sharp talons entwining with my hair and scratching at my face. I heard Molly's muffled screams, and I dragged her forward. I was determined not to let her go. Through the blur of black, I saw her rise off the ground. My fingers slipping through hers, I grabbed at her waist. I pulled her down. I was screaming as I clung tightly to her, knowing in my heart I couldn't lose her too. Then, in a silent flutter, they vanished. I saw the flickering light in the distance, and that's when I realized that the sky was almost dark. I'm not even sure when that happened. I held Molly tightly to me, trying my best to calm her as she cried into my hair. When Mr. Fenton came into view, an oil lamp in a shaky hand, I wept in relief. He looked right at me, his eyes wide with distress as he passed comment on my unsightly appearance. I had been too distracted by the horror of events to notice at the time, but my skin was shredded, deep scratches. Ones only caused by sharp claws or talons, and peck marks covered my arms and the side of my face. Mr. Fenton carried a hysterical Molly back to town, and I trudged alongside them. News soon spread around town about what happened, the silent bird attack, and the shadow man who had taken Orla. Everyone in the town who was able to do so searched the fields, paths, and the harbor for Orla, but it was too dark to find her. The search continued, but Orla remained missing. 3 days passed by. 3 long and agonizing days where I feared the worst, and I blamed myself for what had happened. I should have stood up to Orla. I should have made her leave when I felt it in my gut that we should have. It was the 3rd day when they found her, amid the very same field we had been in the evening that she had vanished. I heard those rumors first. I lingered next to my ma outside on the road that led into town. Most of the town's women, children, and elderly were there too. I felt their eyes flit to me, while mine fixed on Molly, who I caught peeking through the crowd. The whispers spread like wildfire, how Orla's bones were broken as though she had fallen from a great height. They pulled her on a wooden cart that creaked over each cobble and stone it passed over. A white sheet with dirt speckled on it covered her body. It was as the cart was pulled past me that I saw the 2 ragged holes in the cover. I realized that was the bedsheet she had been wearing that night, my ma's sheet. I yelped on realizing this, my sound escaping at the same point that the sheet blew in the wind, catching beneath the wheel before it flew off, revealing Orla's broken body beneath. Her arms and legs were floppy and twisted as though her bones were shattered, and on her right hand was a mark that had not been there before. It was a smudge of black that, in the glimpse I caught before the cover was fumbled back on, I thought it resembled a feather. But the most disturbing of all were her eyes, or at least a spot where they should have been. Now empty red holes where those vivid blue eyes once had been. It looked as though something had pecked them clean out. The screams took forever to die down. They stayed in my head as my ma covered my eyes and then dragged me away from there. She led me to my grandma's cottage on the edge of town. My grandma swayed back and forth in her wooden rocking chair, and with pursed lips she told me, "I know what took that girl. Child, you are fortunate they didn't take you too." And that's when she told me about the slough, the unforgiven dead, so sinful that they were locked out of both heaven and hell. They were known to have bird-like features and fly through the skies in swarms, striking their prey. Those taken by the slough didn't live to tell the tale, and if found, they appeared to have been dropped from a great height. I saw the fear in my grandma's eyes, and at that moment I knew, at some point in her life, she had seen them too. Archived records from Orla Byrne's death report state that she died from exposure to the elements. This doesn't comply with the archived doctor's report documenting how every single bone in her body had shattered. Injuries only caused by falling from a great height, which, given where she was found, could not have happened naturally. For the remainder of her life, Nora Walsh told her family about her encounter with the slough as a warning for them to be vigilant, especially around the time of Samhain, when the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest. There is one archived police report from 1851 in which a young girl named Aoife Murphy, while acorn picking in the meadow close to town, found the dead body of a sailor. All of his bones appeared to be shattered, as if he had fallen from an unexplainable height. Nora carried the guilt of what happened to Orla with her for the rest of her life, and she never forgot about that day, back when she was a teenage girl, when a dark omen of birds filled the sky and a shadow man took her friend. For more scary horror stories, please share and subscribe.